Okay. Hey, everybody, this is Jeff Martin with Magic City Books. I'm so thrilled to have you here for our weekly virtual author series, which we've been doing since about April, about 2 to 3 different events a week, which has been really a great way to stay connected with you and stay connected to our readers and our fans, but also reach new people across the country, sometimes even outside the country. So if you don't know about Magic City Books, or you're not in Tulsa, or you're not in Oklahoma, welcome. So glad to have you here. For our local fans and people I don't get to see every week like we used to when we were doing all the in-person events, I miss seeing you, but I'm so glad to see you all in some virtual setting, or to at least have some interaction. So thank you for joining us. We got a lot of fun things coming up. We won't be doing any in-person events, until 2021 at least, just to be pragmatic about that. But we're going to keep doing these, and we're going to keep having really interesting conversations, serious things, fun things, kind of a mixtape to give you a little bit of we got everything coming up from a conversation about water preservation with Aaron Brockovich. We're going to be having an event with Layla Lalami, in conversation with Roxanne Gay, which is going to be really wonderful. Even Matthew McConaughey. So I talk about a wide variety of offerings. So there's something for everybody there. So I hope you will join us. Go to our website, magiccitybooks.com, and you can see our full list. I won't go through that and make you sit here and hear all that right now. So I'm so thrilled to have this event. One of the things we try to do is to bring you conversations about what's happening in the world, and certainly things that are happening in our community. And there's been few things this year in Tulsa that have been more newsworthy or more potentially combustible than the Juneteenth weekend rally that Donald Trump had at the BOK Center here in downtown Tulsa. Caused a lot of consternation. I remember being, downtown that weekend of Juneteenth, and when that was happening, and also the aftermath of how everything went down, and it was a moment for our city that I'm very proud of, in a way, how we reacted. And I think a lot of people were expecting certain things that did not come to pass in terms of, violent response or anything like that. So, I was really a proud moment to be in Tulsa after that moment. But having a chance to talk about this phenomenon, these MAGA rallies, is something that I'm really excited to hear about. So we're going to be talking to Carl Hoffman, who's written this really wonderful and kind of scary, in the best possible sense, book called Liar's Circus, a strange and terrifying journey into the upside down world of Trump's MAGA rallies. I think of Carl as kind of, as like embedding himself, a la, Sebastian Junger, except, it's a different war zone. It's kind of a different space. And we have to tip our hat to Carl for kind of taking one for the team and going deep into this world for us. So I'm going to be excited to hear that. I'm always also thrilled to not have to necessarily do these interviews myself. I can sit back and just watch like the rest of you. So tonight we have a very special guest moderator, Jeanne McCulloch, who is going to be talking with us. And if you don't know the wonderful memoir that she wrote, All Happy Families, I would encourage you to do so. We're going to be putting links to both of the books here in the chat, so you can buy both of those. We're doing a special 2 for the price of 2 tonight, so that's just one night only. So make sure you take advantage of that offer. And if you don't know Jeanne's work, she has been a managing editor of the Paris Review, the Tin House, and done a lot of different things in that literary world that you guys are probably familiar with. But so thrilled to have Carl and Jeanne talking tonight about this very topical and of the moment phenomenon that we're living with. So I want to say welcome to both of you, and thank you for joining us, and I will turn it over to you, Jeanne.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction and setting this up for us. I will say before we start that usually in a Q&A segment, it's at the end, but I've been told these guys like to have the questions come in all the way along the line. So if we're talking about something and you have a question, put it in the chat box and I will do my best to get to it. No promises, but I will try. Anyway, I read Carl's book in manuscript last spring, and I'm thrilled to be able to ask him questions because there's been a lot on my mind ever since. I I think that it has a very special place in the world of Trumpiana, if we call it that. Unlike the big books that have recently come out, the Bolton book, the Michael Cohen book, the Woodward book, there's a lot of them, Peter Strzok. Carl's book is not shining a light on Trump in his role as president, the mendacity there. The light is not on that man in that way. What he really has shown a light on is a much bigger picture, which is the phenomenon of Donald Trump and what brought us to the place we are now in America and in the world. So he did go deep behind the lines, so the rest of us didn't have to. And he's written this beautiful book about the MAGA mindset. He befriended some of those people that go to all the rallies, and he's here to tell us about it. So Carl, hello.
Hi, thanks so much.
Sure.
And I want to say, I do want to say thank you so much to Magic City and to Jeff and to you and everybody for coming. It's really, for me, it's one of the funnest things in the whole process in the world, really, to get to talk to people about the book, that you spend so much time doing it. And I'm super sad that, I can't be there in person and I can't see everybody's face, but I'm happy to be doing it anyway, virtually. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Sure. So Carl, I think of you in your role as sort of a cultural anthropologist mixed with a participatory journalist. And I was wondering if you would speak first about some of your earlier books and what led you to this particular subject matter in this country. If you could just give us a sense of other work you've done.
Well, I think that if, you said what one word used to describe me, or what I would use to describe me, it's curious. And I really just want to know things. And I always have felt that way. And sometimes I hear people talking about that they want to change the world. And I always think that it's not that I want to change the world. I want to know the world and describe the world and bring the world to you, to people. And that's how I sort of have always felt. So I've done these books over the last 10 years in which I've gone to very, very distant places, really. Book about, I lived in a very, in a 10,000 square mile swamp with former headhunters in New Guinea to understand what happened to Michael Rockefeller, who disappeared in 1961. Or I went tromping through the last virgin primary forest of Borneo to seeking the answer to a guy who had vanished in the forest, a Westerner. And I mean, those kinds of things seem very natural to me, but thinking about Trump in the last few years, it hit me really this summer that I had gone to all these places. I mean, I'd gone to the ends of the earth and I thought nothing of doing that, but that I didn't know any people who voted for Trump. I mean, there were a few people kind of on my Facebook feed, but not really. I mean, and then I live in Washington, D.C., and that, whether it was going to a restaurant or a bar or the gym or buses or, whatever, I didn't meet any as far as I know. And yet there were 63 million people who voted for him. And I just started thinking about those people, and I started thinking about place, this idea of Trumpism as a place almost. And if it was a place, well, then it was a place I could go to, just like I could take a bus across Afghanistan in the middle of the war, which I did, or I could go to this swamp. So if Trumpism was a place, then why not go there? And that place seemed to be was his rallies, the best place to go. And, he'd held more rallies than any president in history, certainly once he'd become president. And, all that just came together in my head. And I thought, if I could take a bus across Afghanistan, I could go live with my fellow Americans. And I could find out, what they were up to and why they supported a man who seemed just anathema to every value that I that I had and that I'd been brought up with.
I know at one point, and it's a great line, you say that you went into the heart of darkness that was your own country.
Well, you know, I had to use that line. You know,
I mean, of course, and I had to cite it too.
I mean, but yeah, that's the way it felt. Well, it's funny, I'll tell you, because people so often say to me now, even as Jeff did in the introduction, kind of this idea of the heart of darkness and going to some scary place. And I didn't really, I mean, I know that that's how everybody felt of it, you know, thinks of it, but I didn't, certainly there were times, and we can talk about this, where I felt very lonely and very alienated, but I never really felt scared. And I didn't feel like you know, the funny thing is, it didn't feel like a foreign country. It felt very much like America, an America that I knew and that I was used to. And that so much, you know, people talk about the flyover country or something in the Midwest, and I didn't feel that way. I felt it was all very familiar to me in so many ways.
I noticed that you, at one point, you went back and talked about a bus ride that you had taken when, I believe, when you were finishing your research for the Lunatic Express from LA back to DC. And you talked about a certain kind of decrepitude that you noticed in America as you were traveling through, and that was the Petri dish that created Donald Trump. And I wonder if you'd say a little bit more about what you found in America as you went through at the rallies.
Well, it was partly, I had such a powerful reaction to America, partly because I had spent literally 5 months traveling around the world on its most dangerous buses, boats, trains, and planes, which is really just a hyperbolic way of saying the worst, you know, the cheapest, the slowest, the crappiest, the boats, these overcrowded ferries. And, you know, wherever I went, there was such joy among people. And, you know, I'm a stranger, and so people treat me a little bit differently and are curious about me, you know, for sure. But, you know, wherever you went, there was a fresh meal. Wherever you went, there was some street vendor bringing you, you know, fresh tortillas or some delicious meal, and people trying to help me. You know, inviting me home to their houses for lunch, for dinner, to stay, no matter where I was. And the very end of it, I flew into, from Russia. I had taken the train into Vladivostok, and I flew, there was no other way, sadly, into LA. And then I took the Greyhound. That didn't seem dangerous, but it just seemed like the way to go. And, you know, it was really sad. I mean, America fell. And this was in January of 2009. So it was really you know, Obama had just been elected, and the recession was, you know, in full swing. And it really, I mean, you know, very hard to get food on a Greyhound. I mean, we ate at Greyhound steakhouses, which are McDonald's, and, you know, the luggage of choice for people was a black plastic trash bag. And, you know, I'd ask people if they could watch my bag for a second, and they would say no. And America just looked like it was, I mean, you know, it didn't help that it was the middle of January and I was on, you know, riding on this Greyhound. But I mean, people were not friendly, and it just looked like America was coming apart. It was like a potholed world. You could see the economic depression, and I didn't think of it until later. But obviously, you know, that was really, I think, the Petri dish, as I say, for the rise of Donald Trump. I mean,
and you, when you went to the rallies, you camped out in line, basically. You really got to know these guys, the men. I think they were all men that you got to know pretty well. Mostly. Yeah. You'd go out to lunch with them. You'd hold each other's place in line. And they would tell you some amazing stories of things that they believed to be true as they went to their 51st, 52nd, 53rd rally. And this was something that had become a great passion for them. To do this kind of thing. And I wonder if you could just say a bit about what you observed. There's obviously no way to encapsulate the rally goer in a nutshell. Your book comes as close, I think, as anything can. But I wonder if you could say something, because there's a lot of crazy stories you hear, and I can tell you it's the first time I wrote in my notes, Michelle's penis. So that
A lot of people don't realize that Michelle has a penis or that their children are adopted, and there's lots of that. Well, I think in order to understand it, I have to go back a little bit. You know, I didn't really know what I was doing or going to do, but I went to my first rally. I drove from Washington to Minneapolis, and the day before the rally, I mean, I knew that people tailgated, but I didn't really understand it. And my hope was to try to kind of pierce that world. But I went the afternoon, the rally's usually at 7, and I went the day before, you know, about 26 hours or so, the late afternoon and the day before. And I found the head just to reconnoiter and see what was what, my first rally. And I arrived to find this crowd of people, you know, 24 hours before the rally, sitting in camp chairs, and they had a 6-foot wooden, a life-size wooden, I mean, a cardboard cutout of Donald. And, you know, I was sort of taken aback by that. And I took some photos and I scoped it out, but I really wasn't prepared to stay. And I felt a little intimidated. I didn't know what the scene was going to be with journalists. So I came back the next morning about dawn, 6:30 in the morning, and I was suddenly late. Like those 20 or 30 people had morphed into, you know, 2,000 already by dawn or more. And the line just went on, and I was flabbergasted by it all. Anyway, so I did Minneapolis, and then I drove to Dallas, and I went earlier to the Dallas one. That was in downtown Dallas. It was on the street, the line, and it was warmer. So, you know, I put my chair out about 3 o'clock, and I spent much of the night there. But again, I didn't know anywhere. But long story short, in Dallas, I started talking to this guy who was walking up down the line selling little buttons for $1, and he had a suit. You know, everybody at a Trump rally is in MAGA regalia, you know, sweatshirts, t-shirts, just American casual wear in red, white, and blue with Trump insignia on it. And this guy was in a suit, and I started talking to him, and he was just an amazing, maniacal, crazy smart guy. He'd been to 50-something rallies, and he was always in the front of the line. And he'd had owned a number of bars and strip joints all over the country. And we started talking. Anyway, long and short is that I had this conversation with him, and I still felt I was late and that I didn't really pierce the rally. So for my third one, when I got to Tupelo, Mississippi, I got there full 50 odd hours before, and I parked my car in this empty arena parking lot and walked up. I think it was like, if the rally was on a Friday, it was a Wednesday. And I walked around the rally, and I found 5 guys camped out in these chairs, one of whom was the guy in the suit.
Was he still in his suit?
And he was still in a suit. He was in a suit, Rick Snowden. And, you know, he remembered me. And, you know, when you're writing, when you're reporting, it's always best to return someplace. And when you meet people over again, they recognize you, and you feel a little bit, they don't think you just dropped in from nowhere. So we he's like, Carl, welcome. He's like, you're number 6. So I sat down, and, you know, then a guy, number 7, showed up not long after. And those were the primary, and actually number like 4 was a guy that I'd also talked to in Dallas. And so from then on, in my 50-something hours of camping out in Tulsa, and it got very cold, and we went out and went to dinner and lunch. And I mean, I bonded with them and became friends with them. And so from then on, whatever rally I went to, I mean, I was texting them, and you know, we were saving places for each other. They were a little more zealous than me, so they would usually get there before me and save a place. But I was, you know, Tupelo, I was the 6th in line, which is a pretty big accomplishment in the Trumpian rallies. And, you know, I stayed, and it was, so anyway, back to your question, you know, these guys so that's what I did, was I hung out really essentially mostly with the super fans, who would always try to be the first in the rally. So on one level, you know, they were kind of the most extreme. Like they were more extreme Trumpians than most people, you would say. But I found that, I mean, I talked to a lot of people and a lot of other people, and I went to quite a few rallies, and I found that they were kind of just a slightly more extreme version of, you know, most Trumpians, and that of most people who are at the rallies. And, you know, that ran a whole gamut of, you know, so-called walk-away Democrats, some guys who were blue-collar factory workers, longtime union. You know, one became sort of my best friend there, Rick Frazier, you know, 63 years old, 34 odd years as a Goodyear Continental Tire plant in Ohio, and a union man. And, you know, they just completely abandoned the Democratic Party and went to Trump. And I think they, you know, there are a lot of people like them. And then there were people who had this great wound, I felt, had carried a sense of loss, either, you know, people who had been devastated in the recession in one way or another, lost money or family, and who were really struggling, and who, you know, sort of carried this wound, really. And then there were people who were just like hardcore Republicans and always would be. And those were sort of the biggest types in a way, but almost universally. And there's a lot I'm not talking about, you know, and driving around the country and in an America that seemed quite empty in so many places, and old town, you know, downtowns that had been devastated by Walmarts and taken over by fast food places, and people telling me how, you know, you couldn't get anyone to go to join the VFW or the Shriners anymore. Yeah. Or I went to a men's prayer breakfast in Shreveport, Louisiana. That was a very touching thing. And those men, there was a group of men that had been since 1960 meeting at 6 a.m. on Wednesdays. And, you know, there were like 12 of them left, and there used to be, you know, 60 of them, and their numbers were down. They couldn't get any young, and they were all older men. They couldn't get young. So all these changes in America, these powerful, I felt, men in particular, who felt a vertigo and a sense of loss and a sense of, you know, that their identity was leaving and being sort of taken away from them. And, you know, then it gets on to Trump, and Trump will say anything. And, you know, from the minute I heard him in my first rally, I was astounded by the lies and how he told them. And it, you know, it goes on from there.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I wanted to read just a short little passage about your experience of seeing Trump on the stage at the rally. I mean, we can go back to how long it took to get from the line all the way into the rally and how many days later it was. But I just think that this is a beautiful passage that sort of sets it up, really why Trump gets his oxygen from these rallies. You say, the craziest part of it was that he, that being Trump, was so relaxed and confident and strong. I didn't want to see it or feel it, but I did. An immense strength, a strong man, a force that echoed Mobutu or Idi Amin or Franco, and that would plow ahead and kill anything in its path. A force that hundreds of Democratic representatives and smart, hardworking journalists and all the rails and rules and conventions of almost 250 years of American history might not be enough to stop, because truth didn't matter to him. He was dazzling, there was no question about it, because he was shameless, guilty of nothing, willing to say anything. And if you didn't read the newspaper and only listen to him and the increasingly sycophantic people around him, you didn't know that 90% of it, more than 90 minutes, almost Castro-like, was simply untrue. I mean, that's beautiful prose. So I wanted to read it so everybody will get the book and read this for themselves. But it just seems to really get to the heart of what a performance piece he is. And he knows he's bullshitting. On some level, do they know he's bullshitting too? Is that part of the exchange?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. I think that the rallies themselves, when you're in a rally, at a rally, there are these overwhelming sensory experiences. The lights are very bright. The music is extraordinarily loud. It's not just, I sort of thought it was going to be sappy country music. Not that there's anything wrong with country music, but it's like, I'm a baby boomer. It's rock and roll from my youth, from a high school, and first dates and first keg parties. Rolling Stones and Queen and this powerful music that sort of grabs you by your soul, and Tina Turner and and I had this feeling in it that it was better than reality, that it was, and that everything Trump said was better than reality, and that it was like the difference between a boxing match and a professional wrestling match. That a boxing match, guys could circle each other for 12 rounds and nobody could even, there's a fight, it's entirely possible that nobody would even get knocked, to the ground, much less knocked out. I mean, somebody could win off of points, which is boring. But despite technical skill, but in a wrestling match, you've got people jumping off of the ropes and hitting each other with folding chairs, and that's just pulling their hair, and that's so exciting, and that's so much better. And that's what I felt like the rallies are. So go back to the question, did people know that it's BS? No, I don't think they do. I think there are huge numbers of people in this country, tens of millions of people, a lot of the men and the women who love them, who feel incredibly anxious about themselves and their power and their place in this world. And they don't necessarily articulate it. Maybe some will and some won't, but they feel it, just like a baby feels hungry or a baby feels missing its mom and it doesn't have the words. I'm not sure, I don't mean to say they're babies, but it's almost that, people have those feelings, and Trump walked in and he articulates those resentments and anxieties in a way that nobody else could or would or be willing to do. You're talking about racism and, people, whites feeling anxious about race. And, there's powerful, deep racism in this country. And then suddenly a man comes and says, we don't have to be politically correct anymore. And, those Mexicans are rapists and they're all coming, and those others are coming. And, people are like, wow, okay, and we're going to make, America great again. We're going to make, we're going to bring back coal mining. We're going to, windmills kill birds, and you're going to be watching television and suddenly the game is going to go out because the wind died down. I mean, Trump says that in rallies. That's one of his great lines. Honey, what happened to the TV? And he says winning, the end of every rally is we're going to be winning, winning, winning. And that winning means something to so many of those people. And it's really powerful. And so they don't, that's a whole nother, category that we could talk about. People they do not consume reliable news. And many people don't even watch Fox News. They watch One American News, or they get all of their news from, it's very frequent for you to hear people say that they're independent researchers and they get their news from Twitter and from social media. And we all know how accurate that is.
Yeah.
So they have they're in a literal bubble of misinformation. And, Trump gets up there and he says the call was perfect. And
that's what they want to hear.
and they want to hear that, and they believe it. They believe it. I mean, you know, that you turn Tucker Carlson on any night of the week, and he's, you know, I mean, these people in positions of authority, and you know, are you know, not telling the truth, or telling this such a warped, I mean, view of the world that, you know, you can hardly believe it.
Well, and you speak about the power of the crowd, and you compared it to a festival, and you compared it to church. You said he's like a fiery preacher.
Well, I was in Dallas in my second rally, and I had expected, you know, the lights are these fantastically bright lights, and there's no shadows in a Trump rally. And my expectation was that, you know, when Trump came on, the lights would dim and there'd be a spotlight on him. But that didn't happen. The lights didn't go down. And they were just as bright. And I was sitting next to a woman who I'd been talking to a lot, who's been texting me lately and is very upset by the book. And she said, surprise. And I said, you know, I'm surprised that the lights are so bright. She said, well, it's like church, or it's like it is in church, which really got me thinking. And of course, you know, we all know that Trump has this huge support from evangelicals, but the way the rallies are built, and the way they're designed, and the way Trump is, and this way he is sort of creating this heaven or hell, this dichotomy, it sent me down a long rabbit hole of reading about religion in America, and in particular Protestant religion in America, and making me understand that they're really playing off on all, you know, how powerful religion in America, and especially Protestantism, is evangelical. I mean, you know, America was founded by evangelical Protestants. I mean, you know, fundamentalist, millenarian, you know, these ideas of city on a hill and manifest destiny that I just thought as, you know, were kind of secular, were metaphors, but they're very specific religious references, actually. Yeah. And Trump was exploiting them in a way, and that, you know, there, if you say, well, what's an American icon? You know, you think of the Marlboro Man or a cowboy might be the first thing out of your mouth. But the other one is the fiery preacher. I mean, he's as an American archetype as the cowboy. You know, the Great Awakenings, the First Awakening, these were powerful historical movements, and that were led by these, you know, preachers who would draw tens of thousands of people to revivals, and people would faint. You know, they would be such struck by sin that they faint. I mean, this is a fairly common thing. And then, of course, people are reborn, and people would do that in Trump rallies too. I mean, people, you know, in Sunrise, Florida, 2 people right on the floor had to be carried out. And we laugh about it, but it's really powerful and deep. It's a really, so, you know, kind of at the core to me of what is driving Trump's base are these big cultural forces, you know, racism and masculinity, a sense of masculine identity in particular. And you say, what about women? You know, women who are associated, you know, partners with these men, and religion, racism, and masculinity, you know, work are really, when I say masculinity, I mean modes of work in part, you know, working with your hands and blue collar work.
Well, and those are the people that feel disenfranchised when they lose their job, say a coal mining job, because he's promising to bring that back, or the people that suddenly their mom and pop business goes out of business because a Walmart comes to town.
Right, and you know, I think, and I talk about this in the book, you know, I as a journalist, I mean, I've been in underground Appalachian coal mines, and I've been in offshore deep water oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico, and I've spent a lot, and I've been on aircraft carriers, and I've spent a lot of time on industrial work and factories and industrial work sites. And, I think there's a misunderstanding among liberals and the left that's, about how important those, how much dignity people get from those jobs. They may seem like, to pencil-necked, Easterners who live in Washington, D.C. and New York, they seem, like dirty, crummy work, but it's their work, their jobs that people do for years, and that people that are require a lot of teamwork and a lot of fraternal support, especially something like coal mining, and that people have made, a good living, ironically, in part from unions and from the labor movement, that people have made and get a lot of dignity out of. And so there's no, when someone like Hillary Clinton comes around and says, we're going to put a lot of coal miners out of work, it is, it's a terrible thing to say. I mean, coal mining is going, but even, Trump can't restore coal mining for large economic reasons and environmental reasons, but that, you can't negate the value of what those jobs, the dignity those jobs give, even though they're also exploitive.
Well, you did have one line where you said for a lot of these men, Trump walking on the stage allowed them to be a certain kind of dude again.
Well,
it gave them power.
I mean, it's remarkable to be at a Trump rally and to, there's a silent moment, a quiet moment, and, these powerful masculine voices will call out, "I love you." Or, I was in Tupelo and there was a guy who was working on the fencing, setting up fencing, and he was driving out after he had finished in a pickup truck, and we were chatting with him, not we journalists, we super fans waiting for the rally to start, and he said a line that just really hit me, which was that, and I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't heard it. He said, I would walk behind President Trump and pick up his poop if he asked me. And
there you have it.
And people love him. They love him intensely and powerfully.
So there was a pause when COVID came along and he no longer had his rallies. He no longer had his oxygen in that way. So what did you observe during that time? I know you told me in the past you had to keep updating the very end of the book as all these things were happening, George Floyd and COVID and all of these events that actually are after the timeline of the books per se. He didn't have that anymore to feed him himself. And I wondered, what, was he deflated somehow, having gone to these rallies and witnessed him as this all-powerful Oz figure? Did you notice in just watching the news that suddenly without them, he felt he was diminished?
Yeah, I mean, as soon as COVID came along, he started, and when it really, took off and started burning through America, and they canceled, he held 5 rallies even in February and into early March, and then he had to cancel them. And then, Trump really just was on the ropes in a way that he had never been. I think COVID stripped away the smoke and mirrors of the campaign and of this upside down world that Trump creates through force of will and just utter shameless BS. And it stripped away those smoke and mirrors in a way that nothing else had been able to do. And people were dying and afraid of it, and so he couldn't have rallies. And then he tried to have, he had his daily White House briefing, and some people said, "Oh, those are his rally replacements," but they weren't the same. I mean, he had an audience of skeptical, cynical journalists, and it's not the same at all. And he was really, suddenly Biden seemed to be rising and Trump seemed to be fading. It seemed like a fait accompli that Trump was going to lose. And he was desperate for his rallies, and I think that all speaks to just how important and powerful the rallies are, and crucial to his power. And when he, and then he was desperate. He tried to have the rally in Tulsa, and only 6,200 people showed up, and that was devastating and shocking, I think, to the campaign. I mean, Brad Parscale, his campaign manager, essentially lost his job soon after that. And, and that was a really powerful indicator to me of only 6,200 people came to that Tulsa rally, not because he couldn't find supporters. I mean, he could have filled that arena easily, but people were afraid of COVID. I mean, they just didn't come. And I think that was such an interesting example of just how the disconnect between what Trump was saying, and even among his base, people were afraid. And so he was still flailing and still on the ropes. And I think just in the last, month, I mean, since he had since the GOP convention, when he was out there again, then he had those 1,200 people on the White House lawn and the fireworks, and he sort of said, screw it, I'm doing it. And he started the rallies again, and he rises, and he, suddenly I'm getting emails from people, friends, and people saying, what's going on? Trump looks like he's gaining again, and Biden's looking sort of small, and it's all the rallies, and I think the way to look at Trump is that he is he's a balloon with a big hole, and that hole is leaking all the time, and he needs the rallies, and that's sort of what, there's nothing new in me saying that, but I think the extent to which that's true is, was sort of profoundly evident to me in the rallies and the way he grows. And as long as there's this there's a relationship. That's the church part, and the lights, he sees the people and the people sees him, and we see each other, and we're all together in this rally. And people, tickets are free. People get their tickets early. They come, they're camping out. There's this groundswell. I mean, Trump is a populist. He's a demagogue, and that is his power. And, at the rallies, a thing we haven't talked about that's really interesting and to me is the way at the rallies he uses the rallies to dangle other GOP politicians and to give them the approval of the crowd, but in that is the option that he can take it away. So in Dallas, for instance, he calls everyone, he maybe pauses mid-speech, and then he'll call people's name. And Rick Perry, it's Texas, so Rick Perry was there, Ted Cruz was there, I mean the whole GOP down ballot. And he tells a little story about each person, and that story is almost always about how loyal they are. And then he gets to Cruz, and he tells a story about Cruz being the debate champion in Princeton and Harvard, and he was he didn't go to Princeton or Harvard, and he didn't do any debates. He liked baseball. He was like a bumpkin, but he destroyed Ted Cruz. And he humiliates him. And Ted Cruz is literally below Trump, and the crowd got 22,000 people who are yelling and screaming. Oh. And he's saying, I crushed Ted Cruz, and I can crush him again, and I can give you these 22,000 people, Ted Cruz, but I can take them away too. And it's all very powerful, and it feels like it's all about power. And it's like naked. It's like watching naked power.
In fact, you did. There's one quote in the book. It's not you, but I'll read it and then I'll identify who said it. The quote is, "After all, great movements are popular movements, volcanic eruptions of human passions and emotional sentiments, stirred either by the cruel goddess of distress or by the firebrand of the word."
Yeah, who wrote that? 1925.
Hitler, Adolf Hitler, 1925, yes. so the idea of the rally and the power of the rally is not a new one to Trump, but it is a new one in America, I would posit.
Yeah, I mean, you really see in the rallies and through the rallies, through his interaction with the crowd, the mob, the crowd's response to him, his use of other GOP people in that crowd, you know, and this idea of loyalty, the rise of an authoritarian. I mean, there's no other way to see it.
And yet you end with the conclusion that from the great wound of Donald J. Trump, I hoped there might be an opportunity for wisdom. So through all of this, you're seeing some sunlight at the end of this.
Well,
that's not the question.
It's from loss that we always get knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's been the way since, you know, Adam and Eve ate the apple. And I mean, you know, the thing is that I spent a lot of time with a bunch of guys, and I liked them for the most part, and I enjoyed their company. And you know, somewhere in that is hope.
Let me ask you about that. And this is sort of a craft question. This is a question about your journalistic practices. You befriended these guys. I assume you told them you were a writer. I assume you didn't tell them anything about the book before it came out. So what is the reaction now? Are there feelings of betrayal, or are there critiques? Are they proud of you on some level? What have you been noticing about
it's all of those things. You know, I really wasn't sure what I was going to do when I started, but you know, the minute I took out my notebook, the game was up. And you know, I take notes constantly, and people say, "What are you doing?" I said, I'm a writer, and I'm writing a book about Trump's rallies." And they would say, well, you know, mostly people would go, well, of course. I mean, they love the rallies. Like, that makes sense to them. And if they said, well, why? I'd say, well, you know, they're very, you know, to me, they're essential to Trump and his election and his power. And they agreed with that. And then if they said, well, you know, what are your politics? They said, well, for the purposes of this, I'm trying to be agnostic. And, you know, I'm here to listen, which is, you know, basically true. I mean, you know, I'm a progressive. I mean, but so maybe saying I'm being agnostic, but I meant like I was willing to hear. I wanted to hear, and I wanted to listen. And, you know, but over time, I mean, I spent a lot of hours, you know, you can't hide yourself from people. And we would have discussions, and some were more curious than others, and some I got closer to than others. So, you know, I think by the end, most people had a sense that, you know, I wasn't a supporter. And I didn't wear MAGA regalia, I mean, ever. I mean, once I was freezing, I didn't have a hat, and this guy, my friend, gave me a MAGA hat, and I put it on because I was just so cold. I felt like I was in a costume. But, you know, I didn't pretend something that I wasn't. But, you know, the flip side of that is that I didn't, you know, I wasn't a jerk to them. I didn't challenge them. I didn't say, well, you know, you're a racist, or, you know, I listened, and I spent a lot of time, and you know, a lot of times we didn't even talk about politics. I mean, you couldn't talk about politics. I mean, that was the thing. I thought I was going to be having these great substantive policy questions with people, and you know, you couldn't, because everyone, I mean, that's something we haven't talked about, but everyone believes in some level of conspiracy theory. Almost everyone, not quite, but you know, it's not peripheral, it's not the fringe. It's like 90% in some way believe, you know, the Frazzle Drip video that in QAnon, and that, you know, the Democrats torture and drink the blood of babies, and that Michelle Obama's a man, and, you know, all kinds of crazy things, that Hillary would kill to win, and, you know, all those. So anyway, you know, now how do they feel about it? I mean, you know, some of them have bought a bunch of books, and they take photos. One guy, you know, he takes photos of himself holding a book in line with MAGA guys on either side of him from one of the most recent rallies. And some have been utterly silent. And one woman wrote me and said how disappointed she was in me and how I was a liar. And, so it's been a little bit of everything.
I noticed the other day when Trump, instead of saying herd immunity, said herd mentality. I feel like that was just a Freudian slip, because that's how he thinks of his rallies, in a sense, that there's this herd mentality and it's all about him and believing these things.
Yeah, I mean, no question about that. No argument for me there. But I think sometimes when you say the word like herd mentality, I think that almost underplays the kind of magic that's going on. And this 2 + 2 = 5. I mean, it's Trump and it's the crowd, and then together they become bigger. They become this thing, and that thing is Trumpism, and that thing is bigger than. That's why the rallies are so important, because it's not just Trump and it's not just the people. It's together, brought together in an arena. This animal becomes constituted, and it's like a living, breathing thing that has power, and that is and that you can feel, and that Trump can feel, and if you're there, you can feel it, and it has momentum, and it has, and I always thought, what was it like for him? What is it like for him when he's at a rally, and then he leaves the rally and he goes home to Washington, and he's when he's sitting there in meetings with these, when these horrible journalists are questioning him, and people like Nancy Pelosi are on his case, and he's thinking about those people screaming, "I love you."
Yeah, that's what's keeping him going, I guess.
And that's powerful.
Oh yeah. So I have a question from our listeners on exactly that issue. This woman says, so how do we get past this power of misinformation?
I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. I really don't. And it's a really, it's kind of the $1 million question. I mean, let's say Joe Biden wins. Let's say the Democrats win both the presidency and the Senate. The next day you're going to have, Tucker Carlson and Rush Limbaugh and all of these people, who have incredible followings, and they're going to be saying the things that they say, and people are not going to be reading the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or The Economist. Think publications that I think of as conservative, even, but fairly reliable in their reporting. People don't read those. So I don't know what happens. I mean, it's really frightening. And you've got people like, this woman in Georgia who just won the primary. She's probably going to be elected, who's a QAnon supporter. I mean, you've got people who are coming into power who literally believe in a fiction. Yeah. And they believe, and it's a fiction, who knows even what, hand the Russians have in it, certainly partly. And I don't know what you do about that. It's really frightening.
Yes. Here's another question from our listeners. How different were the rallies from each other? Was there a sense of place, say Florida versus Michigan?
Inside, no, they're all very much the same. Outside, it's pretty similar. I mean, Florida was great because it was hot, warm, and there were palm trees. And, I spent 2 days in the sun, then there was a band that they had. Whereas, Hershey, Pennsylvania in December was, battleship gray skies and, freezing rain. And, you're sitting there just trying to stay warm and get the hours past. Or Manchester, New Hampshire is even worse. There was 10 inches of wet snow on the ground. So, but other than that, I think there were more. Minneapolis had slightly more Black people, but not many. You're talking a few hundred in a sea of 22,000, whereas Shreveport or Tupelo had almost no people of color whatsoever. And, Sunrise, Florida, which is near Fort Lauderdale, there was a sort of a fairly large Jews for Trump contingent. But again, those are all relatively small numbers. In a way, it feels very much the same. And the rallies themselves, the playlists, the order of things, it's all very much the same.
Speaking of playlists, one of my favorite details, you know what I'm going to say, right, is that they love the Village People, right? And they do the YMCA, and before he comes out, they play Macho Man.
Yeah, Village People are big in the Trump world, and the Rolling Stones and Tina Turner. And, the thing is, it's like an upside down world. I mean, it is this, and if you think about it, it's just really crazy. So especially in a place like Mississippi or Shreveport, there's a huge number of evangelicals, and, thousands, 10 or 20,000, and the Village People come on, and they're, you generally, the doors open around 2:30 to the rallies, and the president's supposed to come on at 7, but often he doesn't come on until 7:30 or 8. So there's a long period, and the music plays on a loop and it goes over and over again. And YMCA is the song. I mean, everybody's dancing and up into every song, but YMCA is like everyone. You get 20,000 people standing up. Their phone lights go on. They're like rocking, and then they do this pantomime. YMCA. I can't really do it very well, but they do it and they dance. And it's really like, if you don't think about it, then it's just whatever. It's a song a lot of people love. It was a big popular song. But you think about it, often, if Pence is there, then, they'll play that song, and then Mike Pence comes out. So all these evangelicals who, think that, being gay is a sin, are dancing to this song, young man, come on, the place you can be. And, then then Pence comes out, and he's, he's terrible. And it's just this, that's just a really good, easy example of the absurdity, and then Trump will get out, or, someone will get up there and say, how many union people do we have here? We're in, aren't we doing great with unions? And, the GOP has been, breaking unions and passing right to work laws forever. And it's like that with everything. We will always protect your pre-existing condition, even as the GOP is suing to eliminate the Affordable Care Act, of which it's primary. I don't have to say all that. I mean, it's just, and it's like that over and over and over again.
Well, there's one more question about the people that got there first. And I know you used an expression, the front row Joes. And the people that got to the front row were even better, up to the rail, right? Mm-hmm. And how that was like the big thing they would do. So the question is, were these frequently first people legitimately super fans, or did they like being first in general?
I think they were super fans. I mean, they love Donald Trump, and they love coming to Trump rallies, and they, it becomes part of your identity very much, and a social thing. To be in the front row, you got to spend, a huge amount of time at a rally. You can't get there at 4 o'clock and be in the front for a 7 o'clock rally and be in the front row. You got to be there days ahead, and then you suffer. I mean, like all good cults and religious rituals, suffering. The more you suffer, the better it is. And you suffer out there in the cold and the heat and waiting and eating bad food. And then when you get in, if you go to the rail, I mean, the rail is intense. You got to stand with these people behind you. It's like being at the rail of you know, a rock concert, and the more people who get there, the more people are pressing at your back, and you can't leave. You know, you want to go to the bathroom, but if you leave, you may never work your way into the front. You'll lose your spot. And so you sit there, and, you know, if you get in there at 2:30, 3:30, 4:30, 5:30, 6:30, 7:30, I mean, you know, you can be there 6 hours standing there, just standing. And so, you know, I felt like it was like circling Mount Kalish on your knees or something.
And that's what you did. We are going
to more powerful, though.
Yes, I guess so. There you go. Power is the word. We're going to conclude now, and I'd like to thank everybody that tuned in here and joined us tonight. And I hope you will buy Carl's book. It's really a multi-layered, nuanced, great document, not only to read now, but to look back on this era and reflect later on. I think it's really going to be on shelves for a long, long time. So buy the book, everyone.
Thank you very much, everyone, for coming in Magic City, and buy All Happy Families, which is a beautiful.
Oh, well, thank you.
Beautiful memoir.
And thank you, Magic City. It was lovely to be there, be here, there, wherever.
Here is everywhere now.
Here is everywhere now. See you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.